Hello and welcome to another English episode of the SEOPRESSO Podcast. My name is Björn Darko and today I have the honor to speak to Annika Haataja about helpful content. Annika is SEO Director at Seeker Digital. She was born and raised in Finland and worked as an SEO in Finland, Auckland, New Zealand, and now in the UK where she also spends her life. Good day, Annika. Happy to have you on the show.
Hello, Björn. Thanks for inviting me. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, and I said it, you're born and raised in Finland. Are you happy to come back to Finland in May 2025 for Nordic SEO Summit?
Very, very happy. Very excited. I haven't done like a conference in Finland ever, but because I barely started my career in Finland, I've always been abroad. So very cool to come back. And May is a beautiful time to be there.
Let's speak about helpful content. That's why you're here. That's why the listeners tuned in. And helpful content as a term, helpful content update. It's a typical fuzzy word created by Google, followed then by SEOs. But what does it really mean, right? Can you unpack helpful content for us?
Yeah, so it's not really anything new. I think we've all been aware of the importance of content being beneficial for the user. Obviously, it's now becoming more of a concept thanks to all the big algorithm updates in the couple of recent years, as well as the new guidelines from Google. Obviously, the guidelines focus very much on sort of the people first aspect, that we should be writing our content for our audience and not for search engines, which is something that obviously Google has been pushing for a long, long time now. I guess even without sort of Google's contribution to sort of the concept and how we produce content for our audience is really about being sort of a beneficial way or providing the content in a reliable way to actually benefit your audience. So it's not to just churn out content every month, writing or paying somebody to write your content and hoping for the best, but there should be really, really a sort of process around it and also a reason really to publish that content for your audience.
Yeah, and you said the magic keyword, right? It's creating content for the audience, not for search engines. And still, if we talk about helpful content, if we talk about content in the context of SEO, it's always kind of SEO focused, right? And still a lot of people think helpful content means creating, long articles, the longest possible articles and stuff. Have you actually found length plays a role in helpfulness, or are there better ways to ensure content genuinely serves user needs? So how do you actually come to a user need versus, okay, I need to have an extensive list of keywords and then create a long block article out of it?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very common sort of misconception when producing content, that, it needs to hit a certain word count. I know we've all kind of used certain SEO tools, especially historically, where you might get like a red flag if it's not long enough, or if you're comparing to the word count of your competitors and kind of the standards of, a blog article needs to be 1,500 words and landing page needs to be this and that. So I think that's still a bit of a hangover from the times when people were using SEO tools perhaps a bit more religiously than they do now. Of course, there's a bit of if you're thinking about a topic that you're writing about, and it might be quite complicated, of course, comprehensiveness plays a part. You might not be able to help the user by writing something for 150 words, but it's, I think, all situational, and it depends on the search intent as well. So, for example, we've probably this is the classic example of a recipe page where there's a long story at first and it takes you ages to get to the ingredients, especially if you're in the supermarket. It's not very helpful for you to have to scan through so much copy. So it's all depending on what is the user like after. For example, we might have a glossary where we write about a concept or a term with 100 words, and that's potentially the most helpful that the user can find any kind of content in that situation. So it really depends in terms of what is the requirement for that specific topic, or the intent, or the type of page that you serve. Even landing pages can be too long. So if it takes forever for the user to find out what they're actually after, to be able to satisfy the purpose of their search, they might actually go away from your site to be able to satisfy it somewhere else. So it's very much a balance of being able to produce enough of information for the user to utilize, but not go over the top and actually perhaps create a bad experience for them.
Yeah. And I actually have a very concrete example as well. When I was working in a publishing site, right? So what we did is like we transferred all the recipes that they have put into a print paper. And normally they have like a huge, novel about the cook and about, the area where it comes from and whatnot, right? And if you transfer this to digital, then users are just interested in the ingredients list and then the steps how to cook, right? That's it, and they don't want to hear the other stuff, right? And I think that's exactly what it means to fulfill an intent, right? If you search for a recipe, you want to have the ingredients and you want to have the step by step how to cook the meal.
Yeah, exactly. Because
Right?
they could be searching for like the history of the recipe, and then that long article would make sense and it would actually be beneficial for them. But if they really just want to know how to cook it, you can keep it very short.
But I also work in product management, right, where we rely a lot on users' research. Now, I know for SEOs it's quite difficult to do user research when it comes to content creation. However, we have tools in place where we can actually, look at the intent and see what kind of questions people ask, and with this kind of create, an idea of what a user needs when it comes to content before we create a briefing and then create content, right? Do you have some practical tips, which tools and what kind of information we need to look in order to determine the user needs?
I guess the most important factor, perhaps, especially in the sort of research phase, is to understand the full journey. So you can find that the content helpfulness changes during the journey of the user. So if you understand the buying journey, which hopefully you do if it's your product, then you can kind of match it based on the content that you're serving in the different stages. You can even obviously conduct actual user research. I know it's more common in UX and sort of CRO, but there's nothing stopping like SEOs and perhaps organic marketers to be involved in that side of things. And obviously there's lots of different tools that you can perhaps combine the data. There's actual audience research tools like SparkToro, which potentially gives you a bit more ideas around what type of audience you are serving beyond just the keywords and the searches that they do on sort of Google and Bing, but actually understanding what kind of behavior they tend to conduct, like when they do any kind of research. But I think sometimes even just understanding what your customer service teams, what do they go through when they serve the customers? Do they have any extra information that your third party tools might not bring you because they've got actual real life sort of customer service situations where they serve the customer, and they might find lots of information from discussing them or sort of answering questions. So I think it's perhaps just looking at the whole cycle of the user, like where do they tend to land in various cycles and what kind of content can you serve in each.
Opposite of, people thinking helpful content means creating longest article possible, there's also the idea that helpful content has to be simple and very easy to read, right? But so you need to find a balance, right, between readability with delivering depth or complexity when the topic calls for it. So especially if the audience may want to have a more nuanced take, how do you balance readability with delivering this depth and complexity?
Yeah, I guess it's really important to think about sort of the level of, because obviously readability is really important and usability is important for any kind of audience. Even if you're writing for like professors, they should be able to feel engaged and enjoy consuming the content. But I guess it's all about understanding your audience and their sort of technical level. So for example, if I were to write content for SEOs who I know have experience in SEO and they're quite skilled, I probably wouldn't write out search engine results page every single time I'm producing the content. I would just say SERP because that's how SEOs speak. So if you speak their language, whilst obviously saying like professional and utilizing the kind of tone of voice that is suitable for your brand, I think that's when you can prove that you know your audience and you almost speak to them directly rather than, again, just creating like generic content that you're hoping that Google will appreciate. So I think that's where the sort of balance might come, making it enjoyable to read for the right audience. That's usually how you can actually find the content becomes more helpful for them.
Are you ready for the SEO event of the year 2025? On May 22nd, 2025, the brightest minds in SEO will gather in the heart of Helsinki, Finland, at the Clarion Hotel for the biggest SEO conference in Scandinavia, Nordic SEO Summit. One day, 10 international top speakers, 100% SEO and no sales pitches. Hear from the best, including Jutta Lehtinen, Annika Haataja, Bastian Grimm, Martin Splitt, Stefan Zisch, and myself. Learn from the pros and take your SEO game to the next level. And there's more to it. The Lufthansa Group is official partner airline offering exclusive discounts on flights from Germany. So what are you waiting for? Head to NordicSEOs.com and be part of the future of SEO. Nordic SEO Summit, the event you can't afford to miss. Tickets available now at NordicSEOs.com. Be there! Yeah, and also like using a lot of visual elements as well, right? So lists, tables, infographics that explain a very complex topic and make it easier to understand, right? So you don't have to write, a novel, but use visual elements and work with UX. I guess that's also very helpful.
Yeah, I would say so. It's almost like if you're explaining something to your friend and during a conversation, you're like, well, let me just show you. Because sometimes showing is better than like explaining with words. So like you said, using images or graphs or tables, it might give the user, it's like the images, well, the equivalent of 1,000 words. It's kind of the same with tables or infographics, where you can explain a potentially quite a complex concept with just the actual visuals themselves. But I guess it also depends on where you place the rich media on the page. Does it actually help in that section? I've seen, for example, if we're talking about, for example, embedded videos, because videos can be obviously adding engagement on the page, people might stay longer. Obviously, there's lots of great benefits, but I've seen videos embedded just like even above the H1, and there's like no explanation what the page is even about. It doesn't have a description or a title. You kind of feel like, okay, is this meant just for video schema and kind of just ticking some tech SEO boxes, but not actually helping the user? So yeah, there's definitely, I think there needs to be a bit of a strategy behind that for sure.
Yeah, but I also think like just looking at the SERP per se, like doing a SERP, looking at the SERP per se, you will understand what kind of media or what kind of content type, format, whatever, is actually considered as helpful content, because Google, sometimes you see a lot of YouTube videos. Of course, it's YouTube, but it is very helpful in the sense that you just land on a video that explains how things work, right? Without having like a long text. Who has time to, read through a text without visual components, without a video to understand? I don't know, if you're a sailor, how to do a specific knot, or if you go fishing, what kind of bait you need to use and stuff like that. So it's very helpful to have those visual elements. And, just looking through the SERPs and understanding this will also help sometimes to understand, okay, what kind of content do I actually need to create for a specific topic? So,
yeah, I think that's a good point. That removes the kind of idea that, let's just add a like stock image there and let's just make it look pretty, or let's create an AI generated image just to make it look like a blog, but actually there should be a reason behind that rich media, something that can assist users. Even like video or just voice recording can be a very different way of explaining something rather than in a text format. And if you do like an interview, even like 1 minute interview with an expert, and you embed that on your blog, then that adds a different way of consuming that content that could be helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. Blog is a very good bridge to the next question. Like helpful content often also gets tied exclusively to formats like blogs and guides, right? But do you think other types of content can also drive significant SEO results? So what's been effective beyond just standard blog posts when it comes to helpful content?
I think every type of content that we produce can be helpful in its own way. I know the sort of Google guidelines, they tend to sound like they are meant for just blogs or like very long form articles, but even a landing page can be helpful. Like we said earlier, you can cram the page with too much information, too many actions, and confuse the user, whereas you can actually make it a lovely experience and assist them with the content that you add to the page. So, for example, like glossary can be a very helpful content, and it's a very different type of, I guess, media than a blog or an article. So you kind of, again, need to bring it into the sort of factor of user intent. Where are they in the buying cycle? What type of content would be the most beneficial for them? And how can you make that specific content helpful for that specific moment that they are in?
Yeah, but also like, okay, I mean, it's easier on a blog or a content hub per se to, to think about, okay, for what kind of topical authority I want to stand for, and then create helpful content around that topical authority. But if you have like a platform, like an e-commerce shop, you have your product, you have your product detail pages, you have your category listing pages and stuff. Also, there helpful content can happen, right? I always take Amazon as an example. If you want to buy a product and you land on a product detail page, I mean, the content on the page per se is really helpful in order to, for me to take a decision whether or not to buy it. And it's not only the product descriptions that they offer in very rich, extensive formats, videos, infographics, whatnot, but also the user reviews that they mix up on those product detail pages. So this I would consider as very, very helpful. Yet, if we look at e-commerce SEOs per se, I mean, they mostly focus on category pages, so very generic keyword focus, right? And still, we see those old SEO tags at the bottom, which of course are not helpful at all. I mean, it is just like a general text about a specific product or product brand or whatever, right? But what would be your idea to create a category page that is very helpful in order to find the right product, for example?
Yeah, it could even be the sort of the product listings themselves. Sometimes we've done a lot of auditing on specific SERPs when it comes to category pages, and especially like home and interior categories. And you can see that there's a bit of a mix in terms of how many products they present on the page. Some might have over 100, whereas others might have like 4,000. And then you kind of think about like, how is the user going to behave when they have over 4,000 options? They might not have other ways of searching except filtering or just using pagination or scrolling. So that's not necessarily the best experience that you can provide for the user. Are there any ways that you can assist them throughout that process? If, for example, providing subcategory pages instead, which present already the type of product that they might be after, reduces the time that they need to do the research, make a decision, and essentially buy. So there are, I think, perhaps less so when we're thinking about content as a traditional way of writing copy, but the content itself is everything on the page. How can you assist the user by going through their experience and through the buying journey again, and ensuring that they don't need to spend so long in searching for something that they already know that they kind of want. And I guess you mentioned about sort of the product pages as well. If we're, I guess home and furniture is quite a good example, where usually the first thing that they want to know is what size is it? Like, how big is it? Does it fit my room? And if you don't even have the dimensions, then you're missing like a crucial element of the helpful content. Even though it's just numbers, it's not text, it is, and it's one of the most important parts that the user will be searching for.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Well, when people aim to create better content than competitors, for example, because that's also always a misconception. I have to be better than the competitor, or I have to write 10% more content than the competitor has in order to win that game, right? but it can end up in a content arms race, I would say. So how do you define better in a way that actually aligns with Google's helpful content goals?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because that's the kind of, I think, also another hangover from the maybe 10 or 20 years ago, when we were always talking about skyscraper and everything has to be following skyscraper strategy. So yeah, essentially writing the same as the competitor, but perhaps improving the headings or the metas, and it doesn't really, work that way. That's essentially, if we follow that kind of strategy, we're just adding more noise to the internet. It's going to be exactly the same as the others, but a little tweak here or there doesn't really change the helpfulness of the content. So I think generally there's always something as a business or a brand that you can offer to your audience, which is often, although it might seem like it's exactly the same as your competitors, but it's not necessarily exactly the same audience either. So trying to find out what is something unique that you can actually write about, and not necessarily, because I think often we feel like, if competitors are writing about it, I should be writing about it. So it's almost like a FOMO, like I don't want to miss out. I'm sure there's something I can gain from this, but actually, your audience might not care. Like it might not be relevant for them or interesting. So really looking at who is your target audience and what do they actually want to know. And even if it is perhaps similar topic than your competitors, there's nothing wrong about that. But can you add anything unique, whether it's the perspective of it? It might be a completely different way of producing or talking about a topic, or maybe you have certain stats that others in the market don't. Like, for example, if you said, well, 80% of our customers say this is an issue, that's really valuable stuff, because nobody else has that exact same stat. And if you can obviously back it up, then even better. But the uniqueness and the extra value, I think that's something that you can read through, like Google's documentation. That's one of the biggest parts of helpful content as well.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, and that goes along with I did a podcast the other month with somebody that the topic was about information gain and content, and it's exactly what you just described, right? Finding some unique data, finding something that is tied to the topic, but also competitors don't write about, right? And for example, doing user research again, right? And I took the example last time. It was like a robotic mower, like a lawn mower. Is that a word in English? Yeah, lawnmower. Yeah, it is. And so you buy the product, you get all the product specifications, right? But what nobody tells you is that you actually have to clean up your lawn before it goes, right? Because I have kids, right? And it just starts off, and then it destroys everything that is still laying on the lawn, right? Nobody tells you that, and that's something that is an information gain that needs to be in the content, right? Okay, before you install it, before you start it, make sure that the lawn is clean and all items are removed from it, for example, right? Or so these are things that you can identify while doing user research and listen to your customer care complaints, for example. If you have stats, yes, then add those stats and always add data that your competitors don't have. And I think that's a competitive advantage if you get that information. So it's a brilliant point. And she also said in that podcast, I think we also explained it in a way as it's also creating new synapses for Google, right? So they know, okay, competitor A, B, C, write about this content. That's the information I have. That is what I can extract for the knowledge panel, for, a feature snippet and whatnot, right? But as soon as there's a new information coming, they will take it from you, and you becoming this authority that they get the new synopsis from, that they get the new information and create a brand new SERP experience, for example. So it's a brilliant point.
That's a really good point, because then that kind of, I guess, sometimes you might feel, well, I don't have any extra information or anything. But I think for businesses, a lot of the information is so obvious. It's so day to day that you forget that it's news to somebody. So obviously you don't want to, explain complex topics in a very simple way and expect that people find it interesting. But a lot of the work that you can do is around sort of your USPs anyway, as a brand. If you understand that really well, almost from like an external point of view, then you might open up these sort of new pathways for your content as well, to understand what is it that we're bringing to the table in this industry, because everybody's unique. And I guess once you find it out, then it's so much easier to create a very effective content strategy as well.
There's also this perception that content needs to be created or reviewed by professionals with advanced credentials to rank, like, medical content needs to be written by doctors, right? And so do you see this is a necessary in all cases, or are there other ways to establish expertise and credibility without being actually an expert in that field, without being having that authority in a specific area?
Yeah, I would say, like, obviously it depends on the industry. If you're writing medical content, usually the rule is anyway, you can't necessarily state that something is good for somebody, because it's not always the case. And there are very sort of tight caveats in terms of writing medical copy. But of course, it helps if somebody with a medical background at least has reviewed it. So I've seen some content that that performs actually really well, even though the author has said to be a content marketer, but then the reviewer perhaps is an actual doctor or a nurse or person in the industry who has years of experience doing the job itself. So I guess it depends, of course, on the industry, and even other industries I've seen. If the background of the content writer, even if their title is content marketer, if you can tell that that's their niche and that's something that they've been researching for like 10 years and they've been writing about it in multiple different publications, even though they're not necessarily, let's say, a mechanic, they might still be able to write about the topic in a very comprehensive way. So it does really depend. And sometimes even I think what Google says is that you're either an expert or an enthusiast. So technically, you can qualify when you're writing about the topics, and especially if you have lived experience. Like if we're talking about, for example, medical topics, you might be somebody who suffered from migraine for years, and you have an example product or a natural remedy or a lifestyle choice or change that has helped for you. That's still a valid comment that could be added to, or quote that could be added to the content, and it can provide different type of value than what a doctor would say, and a doctor would probably say the same pretty much for everybody else. So yeah, there could be that sort of extra uniqueness that somebody brings to the table, even if they don't have the sort of more traditional credibility or accreditation that you might get from an industry.
Yeah, and I also can imagine it's quite hard. I mean, who can afford to have doctors and professors and whatnot in their network that also willing to write for your specific site? Yes, if you're an authority in that field, like you're very famous and very authoritative paper that publishes research, then yes, of course, right. But if you are a, let's say, a pharmacy site that also wants to create a blog and speaks about diseases and how to and whatnot, right? So it's really hard because yes, you can build up your authority as somebody that writes and gets also all the mentions and gets also all the backlinks and kind of is being shared all the way and stuff and being but that's a long way, and that's for all industries, right? So you have to continue, like from my perspective, you have to continuously create, publish content that builds up that authority over a long term, like over years. It's not something that you can achieve overnight from my perspective.
Yeah, that's very true. And I guess if you consider, for example, a CEO of a tech company might not be the best writer in the world, and it's probably an assumption across the board. So, you still probably need to hire somebody who writes in a way that is, we're talking about the readability aspect and is engaging and it's great grammar and everything else checks out, because you also, if it's poor grammar, it's not going to be helpful content. So it doesn't necessarily mean that automatically if somebody who knows the topic inside out is the best to write it. So again, there's a bit of a balance in terms of bringing that expertise in. Yes, absolutely. It just adds extra value to the content, but the actual writing process itself and the authorship, I think it's something that can be a bit sort of questionable if you see like a super Indian pharmacist writing a really long blog about something and it's written perfectly well. So not to say that they can't write very well, but of course they're not copywriters or they're not experts in writing itself. So yeah, definitely finding that balance and not necessarily being too afraid to, bring up that credibility from other people as well. It can be beneficial and, again, bring that sort of uniqueness to your blog.
Yeah, Annika, last kind of elephant in the room question, right? So helpful content, it's getting more and more, or it's becoming more and more important also through all the Google updates. Now Google is also starting to pretend to identify AI content in its helpful content update as well. So we have like this boom, this hype of AI, and everybody kind of uses AI also to create content. And, sometimes also for me, it's really hard to, make a difference between, okay, what is now better? What AI created? What is more helpful? What is AI created? What a human created, right? And sometimes also the AI content is much better and more helpful because it's better structured and kind of, also depends on the prompt, but also more to the point, let's say, than a human can write. Of course, this creative note and stuff is missing, but how, like, if we look into the future, right? How will helpful content evolve in times of AI, and also specifically Google going against it with Google content, with a helpful content update? So I think there needs to be a balance that we need to find in some way. What's your idea? What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, I think it's just, in a sense, it's the same process. Even if you were to use AI, most likely, I personally have read AI content and I haven't found it quite as helpful or quite as engaging as a human written content. So we sometimes do those comparisons as Seeker, but generally, if you think about when you use AI, what's the outcome? What's the output of that? It's something that either, yes, your prompt and the research that you've done, all the information that you can provide it, and hopefully the expert comments and everything comes into play anyway, and you feed that in and you expect probably like the best blog ever. But if you think about the hallucination factor, all the elements that the AI has when it comes to assuming this is good content, the assumptions there are probably quite different to when a human writes it and produces it with care. So I guess there are ways to utilize AI, and I wouldn't say it's completely, a no-no, because there's a reason why these tools exist, and there's clearly some sort of a need for them. Figuring out in what part of the process is AI, your best assistant, essentially. Would it be perhaps in the research phase? Maybe couple that with, editing, maybe create the content brief, maybe create the initial framework, and then feeding in all that uniqueness that you can just possibly find to be able to make it the most sort of helpful piece of content that you can write. So I guess the whole writing aspect is still, in my opinion, a bit questionable because it takes away the sort of creative process that a human does have when they think about being the user, being the human reading it. Is perhaps much easier at the moment, at least for the user or for the human, to do the sort of final production of it all. But like I said, obviously they are getting much better. We do have some SEO tools that utilize AI. I would absolutely love to continue to do that because it does help some parts of the process for sure. So I guess it just depends on your own sort of team, your process, what kind of skills you have, what are the skills that the AI could perhaps complement your skills with. It's very kind of nuanced, but obviously everybody's got their own experience.
Yes, but I think that was very helpful content. Thank you very much, Annika. Looking really forward to see you in person in May at the Nordic SEO Summit. Thanks for being on the podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and we see and hear us next week again on the SEOPRESSO Podcast. Ciao.